Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to this interesting discussion. It's an unusual topic for me. I don't know a lot about the Jehovah Witnesses, so I was happy to read this. And Amanda, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you start.
All right, welcome back. And for those of you who maybe new this session, the way this works is I give a preliminary overview of the topic for the first portion, and then mostly we are focused on discussing the short texts that I provided. And this course for the virtues of resistance is looking at ethical exemplars from all different backgrounds, traditions, professions, situations in life, and circumstances to see how did people resist the Nazi tyranny in their own time and in their own way, and what do these various kinds of resistance have to teach us about opposition or resistance against injustice in our own time? So we look at ethical dilemmas and also a broad spectrum of scenarios. So with this one, we're looking at Jehovah Witnesses, and as Nicole mentioned, I too am less familiar with Jehovah Witnesses. However, my best friend in junior high school was a Jehovah Witness, and that is how I started to learn the word apologetics, because suddenly I had someone who was always giving me books and all kinds of reading material, and I had better learn how to discuss with him because he wasn't leaving my doorstep. He was in my class every single day. And we were very close friends and had a lot of banter about theology. So we were schoolmates for 2 years. And that was really my first kind of contact with anyone who is part of this particular tradition. And it's not exactly I mean, I guess it's a kind of debate about whether it would be deemed a Christian group, but it's a non-Trinitarian group and it's a Bible-based group, but with some different interpretation of scripture than many of us would be familiar with, and some of that will be very pertinent to this discussion. Um, I then, apart from my junior high friend, heard about Jehovah Witnesses, kind of, yeah, the door-to-door evangelism, which has been a feature throughout pretty much for a long time. And that missionary activity is also part of how Jehovah Witnesses, which were first kind of established in the 1870s in the US, then went on to do missionary activities in Germany a couple decades in, starting in the 1890s. And that's how there came to be between 20 to 30,000 Jehovah Witnesses in Germany upon Hitler's kind of rise to power. And interestingly and notably, Jehovah Witnesses began to be the first uh, group to be really persecuted by the Nazis because here were these people within German society who didn't belong to any of the conventional churches and who had many convictions that were very, very antithetical to the political religion of Nazism, if we could call it that, or to the ideology of Nazism. And so um, the other, yeah, apart from my friend and apart from the door-to-door awareness from maybe some people who had come to our home to try and ask us some questions about what we knew and what we were open to. I then, again, on this trip that I refer to so often on these sessions when I was 18 and traveling to Germany and Poland on the March of Remembrance and Hope, I started to see a little bit more about Jehovah Witnesses in the former concentration camps that I visited because when I would see those displays showing all of the different triangles that political prisoners were labeled with inside the camps, there was a purple one to label Jehovah Witnesses. And so that was just a kind of a little bit of awareness that this was another victim group, not a predominant group, and yet another group nonetheless that was persecuted and antagonized by the Nazis. And as you can see in one of the texts that I proposed for this session, a very early New York Times article from September 17th, 1939, mentioned that the first conscientious resistor was a member of the Jehovah Witnesses sect, and that the Germans executed this objector to war. So, right at the outset of the war, It mentions the first German conscientious objector to participating in the present war, August Dickman, 29 years old, has been shot here by firing squad for sabotage. So Jehovah Witnesses knew that their non-participation would be costly, and they have a posture and a position, not exactly of pacifism, but of political neutrality or of being apolitical. And so that definitely lent itself to a position that where they were unwilling to give a Nazi salute or join up various party organizations or send their children to Hitler youth meetings or to display Nazi flags and participate in rallies because even ordinarily, this position of political neutrality means that Jehovah Witnesses don't lobby or vote or run for office or protest. And if we want to wonder why, this comes to a certain interpretation of the Bible. Again, not necessarily one that we might share or even see, but nevertheless, one that is grounded in an interpretation of Scripture. Jehovah Witnesses will say, well, Jesus refused political office. He taught his disciples to um, not be of the world. He exhorted his followers to be loyal to God's kingdom, and there's an importance to be free to speak to all, to anyone and everyone, and to not take sides, and also to have a kind of international community and camaraderie and brotherhood. So that's a little bit of how Jehovah Witnesses would describe this um, apolitical or neutral stance rather than calling it anti-Nazi or pacifist, to be very sort of simple about this. And so, yeah, Jehovah Witnesses were unwilling to do all of those things, and that aroused suspicions and was seen as subversive. And what the Nazis wanted was to just get them on board and get them to either swear oaths, renounce their religion, sign declarations, and most of them were not very cooperative because really these are some of the very core tenets of being a Jehovah Witness. And so it wasn't working very often to torture people in an attempt to get them to sign those declarations or swear those oaths. And that's what you can see in the letter I provided, which is one of the letters, one of the historical letters that the German Resistance Memorial Museum has. It's an open letter to the people of Germany who believe in the Bible and love Jesus Christ. So it's one of these tracts that's written in German to let everyone know that this is a coercion of conscience that's being conducted in many parts of Germany. The party district leaders have been attempting in vain to force Jehovah Witnesses to sign declarations of honor. And then it lists an example of one of those declarations. And interestingly, I had read in another news article that supposedly the Jehovah Witnesses were the only persecuted group that had a really clear kind of choice of ending their imprisonment if they just signed a declaration renouncing their faith. It was like a pretty easy path, and not many did that. Some people did leave, they were able to emigrate. Some people did renounce their faith, but many people were imprisoned and they suffered the consequences. Interestingly, as we talk on these sessions from time to time about memorials and commemoration, I found out that there's going to be a new memorial inaugurated in the same area where there are many memorials for various victim groups. Of course, the Jews have the most kind of predominant memorial, the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, but there are other memorials um, for other victim groups, and such as the Roma and Sinti, who we've discussed before. And now the plan is to inaugurate one for Jehovah Witnesses in Berlin on June 24th, 2026, so coming up. And that will be to commemorate the 14,000 Jehovah Witnesses who were imprisoned, including 4,200 who were sent to concentration camps, and at least 1,700 Jehovah Witnesses who lost their lives because of Nazi tyranny. And so, of course, those numbers are much smaller than the number of Jewish victims, or even than the number of victims of Action T4, the euthanasia program. And yet, when we consider those numbers as a proportion of the 20,000 or so Jehovah Witnesses who were in the country, 20 or 30,000 Jehovah Witnesses who were in Germany, it's a very significant number as a percentage of the group who were there. And of course, yeah, there are survivors from among this group. And actually, while I was visiting Ravensbrück concentration camp in July. The only other group that happened to be that the only other group that happened to be there that day was a group of Jehovah Witness visitors. And I remember distinctly because I decided to eavesdrop a little bit on that tour group. And as I passed by, the guide was asking, well, why did why would Jehovah Witnesses not have followed sworn these oaths or participated and or like told people told the Nazis like reported on other people. I think that's what it was. It was probably why wouldn't the Jehovah Witnesses report on other people? And I can't remember exactly the details, but it was something like they were trying to say that Jehovah Witnesses were going to be conscientious objectors and not participate in what was going on because not just to protect themselves, but because they didn't want to implicate family members or relatives or to have other people get harmed. So a real like non-intervention, non-compliance with the regime, and just like a kind of attempt, I guess, they were trying to grapple with justifying all of that non-intervention, so to not exacerbate the victimization of people. Another thing I found interesting in the course of just my very cursory look into this topic is that um, relatively recently, Jehovah Witnesses began to sue a German military museum for an archive of Nazi era uh, items. Uh, uh, and so this is quite interesting. Basically, there's a family kind of collection of items that had belonged to Jehovah Witnesses, and they have it. And the museum, this military museum, says we acquired it in good faith. We purchased it correctly. And the family is saying, no, no, no. My brothers died for refusing to participate in military service. I don't find it proper that his inheritance is stored of all places, a military museum. So that's an interesting debate going on right now. Um, yeah, Jehovah Witnesses, in some sense, again, that we may not necessarily concur with, but that we can at least be mindful of, um, do think that there's a kind of return to the early church in their approach, that they're doing Bible-based study and restoring their kind of mode of living to that of the early Christians. So, yeah, that's a little bit about Jehovah Witnesses and the kinds of persecutions that they faced, which really center around declarations and oaths. And even still, we have in our kind of ethical landscape knowledge that Jehovah Witnesses have historically, and I'm not sure if this is changing a little bit. I did see some headlines about refusals to have blood transfusions, and so maybe we'll have some discussions about that. I'm sure if you've had any kind of ethics discussions at all about Jehovah Witnesses, they've probably centered on maybe parents opting against allowing their child to have a blood transfusion, and is that a basis for the state to intervene and transgress against parental rights for the life of the child? Why or why not? And then when we look at oaths and declarations, well, we have all kinds of things we can discuss during our time together. A few years ago, maybe it's even several years ago now, there was the summer jobs grant program of the federal government that required that organizations wanting to hire summer students sign a box, check a box, an attestation saying that they support abortion. And many groups had applied for this funding, not even realizing that they had signed this attestation and then basically wanted to refund the money and withdraw their check of this box. And that did not last very long. Thankfully, there was a lot of push and backlash against having a sort of purity test for being pro-abortion in order to hire summer students. That's a very gross kind of ideological test that had been created and thankfully was short-lived. So lots to consider about this, especially within a medical context. Signing things, attesting to things, a sort of ideological purity being sought. And so, with that, and again, with humility about my limited familiarity really with Jehovah Witnesses, apart from this cursory survey and some of the anecdotes I've mentioned, I now warmly open it up to our discussion of the texts and of anything else you have on your mind.
I'm just going to jump in here. One of the things in the letter that you, or the resistance figures talking about Johannes Harms, right at the very end where he says like they keep they keep pestering him at his most weakest moments when he's going towards the scaffolding, they keep asking him over and over. And it kind of made me think about, just in a completely different context, is the patients who keep getting pestered to get made. Like everyone comes like over and over again, asks, do you want euthanasia? Do you want made? Do you want made? Just like trying to break people down at their weakest. And it really struck me that, and also what they're asking for them in one sense is such a small thing, right? Just sign a paper. Just sign a paper and then you'll be fine. We'll let you go free. And it's because it's small, the temptation is greater.
And especially when you consider relatives, friends, who else might be implicated and what you're weighing.
Yeah.
And so let's read this short excerpt from the letter, after which also this session is named. And I think that this man has a very striking look to him, a very ardent kind of seriousness. Uh, Here we go. This is in the short 2 pages of the Resistance Figures, what Johannes wrote to his father. The death sentence has already been passed. I'm lying chained up all day and night. The marks on the letter come from the handcuffs, but I have not yet stood up to the utmost. They don't make it at all that easy for Jehovah's Witnesses to stand tall. I, too, am always given the opportunity to save my earthly life and lose my real life. Even in sight of the scaffold, Jehovah's Witnesses are given another chance to break their oath. So the battle goes on for me, and I too have many victories to win, so as to be able to say, I have fought the battle, I have kept up my belief. From now on, I am worthy of the crown of justice, which God the just will give. So pretty tremendous to be under a death sentence with the scaffold in view, with the somehow ability to write a letter to his father, which is also kind of exceptional and demonstrates their kind of proximity to reintegrating with German society, if only they would renounce this conviction. And you can see how such a letter is that, like, that's exactly the kind of letter that the group of Jehovah Witnesses visiting Ravensbrück would probably have read aloud, to think, okay, would I have the courage to be steadfast and to persevere and to not give in? And I think even if we disagree maybe with the rationale or with the belief system, or I mean, obviously not participating in Nazi activities is across traditions. We have this with Franz Jagerstatter, we have this with others. But of course, there isn't a kind of agreement among Christians on non-participation in the military, or certainly not in voting and protesting. We see, of course, that as we studied earlier, the Scholl siblings were very keen on protest of a certain form. So even if some of their positions within the society are a bit contentious, there's, I think, something admirable about that steadfastness that says, I will not. I will not concede and capitulate under any circumstances. I will not break. And then for the person to exercise that degree of resolve is commendable, and especially when on such a side of moral clarity in terms of now it's interesting, to what extent was it just I won't participate in anything at all related to government, versus I won't participate in Nazism, which is exceptionally evil. It's interesting how the non-participation matched like the most evil totalitarian regime possible. So it really, I think, paid off to have a position of non-compliance with the regime in a day when the regime was the worst pretty much possible. So yeah, lots to consider.